Donc, je m'appelle Annie, bonjour, hi. Je m'appelle Lila Cashew et je suis la coordinatrice de recherche pour de Gonson Doge, l'environnement réseau pour la recherche sur la santé des Autochtones du Québec. Euh, nous nous trouvons actuellement à Jojoge, territoire non cédé, Kanien'kehá:ka, aussi fréquenté historiquement par la nation Anishinaabe. Nous vous invitons à partager dans le chat les peuples autochtones qui ont façonné le territoire sur lequel vous vous trouvez aujourd'hui. Et nous vous souhaitons la bienvenue au 7e webinaire de la série Pratiques innovantes et prometteuses favorisant la réconciliation, l'autochtonisation et la décolonisation des milieux postsecondaires et la réussite et la persévérance des étudiants autochtones. Ce webinaire portera aujourd'hui sur de bâtir des relations, partenariats avec les communautés et les personnes autochtones. Audrey?
Oui, j'arrive. Donc, tout le monde, Annie. La recherche a une place fondamentale dans la société d'aujourd'hui quant à l'amélioration de la santé et du bien-être. Par le développement de connaissances sur la santé des individus et des groupes, elle peut aider à identifier, comprendre et traiter les inégalités en matière de santé et ainsi contribuer à une offre de services et à des produits de soins plus efficaces et durables. Cependant, pour plusieurs Autochtones, la recherche est à ce jour perçue avec méfiance. La blessure laissée par la recherche semble s'inscrire dans la continuité des pratiques coloniales qui persistent dans la modernité. Bien qu'il y ait un intérêt grandissant pour les partenariats de recherche avec les communautés autochtones, celles-ci restent souvent des objets de recherche et font encore face à des chercheurs mal préparés présentant des projets avec peu d'intérêt pour les communautés impliquées. Des recherches menées dans le cadre de partenariats authentiques et avec un engagement communautaire réel auprès des peuples sont nécessaires afin de lutter contre les inégalités en matière de santé, mais également les inégalités sociales. Depuis, l'établissement de partenariats de recherche équitable est une étape importante favorisant l'autodétermination des communautés autochtones. Dans le cadre du webinaire d'aujourd'hui, nous donnerons la voix aux chercheurs et à leurs partenaires communautaires et à des chercheurs communautaires aussi, afin d'offrir des exemples concrets de recherche collaborative qui sont équitables et bénéfiques. Donc, je vais inviter Pierre à présenter Jill Thorey parce qu'il a travaillé très longtemps avec elle. Donc, je pense que c'est la meilleure façon, la meilleure personne pour présenter Jill.
Ben, merci Audrey. Je vais peut-être continuer en anglais pour introduire Jill. So, yeah, I don't remember when, probably dates back to the early 2000s that we initially met and started working with Jill through the Cree Health Board. And actually, she joined the Cree Health Board in the mid-90s and was responsible for public health surveillance, communications, research, evaluation, clinical, preventive practices, public health competency development. And I think she was assistant director of public health and remind me, Jill, I think it was director of special services or something like that it was called initially. Which captured also research. And Jill had worked also many years with Indigenous groups in Northwestern Ontario prior to moving to Quebec. And now she is a part-time, she's involved part-time on palliative care issues in both Northwestern Ontario and Quebec. So with this short introduction, I'll let Jill take the lead. Oh, you're the classical muted.
Okay, good. There I am. Thank you, Pierre, and thank you for the invitation, everyone. Nice to see some people. again. I should have, I did a little PowerPoint, which I'll share with you. Just a minute, how do I do it? Okay, there we go. I really had intended to call it all our relations, because that's the common term used by Indigenous people speaking, or at least with Anishinaabe and Cree. So I thought there was going to be the typical land acknowledgement today. So I'd like to, with this talk, I'd like to acknowledge the great shift in how universities are addressing research with Indigenous peoples, but also not forget that research is a university and global corporate prerogative. And that the majority of researchers, research managers, decision makers, and funders are non-Indigenous. So let's talk about, I wanted to talk about what happened with the land acknowledgement, but it actually turned out that we had a real acknowledgement in Indigenous language from Alex. So I'm speaking here about the land acknowledgements that are customary nowadays for all over the place. So my niece called me from Ottawa, and she was responsible for the land acknowledgement for some upcoming event. And she said, well, I feel like it's just an empty formula. She asked me if I had any ideas. So I was thinking about it, and it is formulaic, and the content or the event may have nothing to do with Indigenous issues. So how are we to understand it? Is it indicative of a paradigm shift? So personally, I come from a small town in northwestern Ontario, east of Winnipeg. And when I first began working for Grand Council Treaty 3 in the early 70s, there was absolutely no public discussion of the dispossession which had occurred and which continues to occur, and began with initially in that area dams, and then treaty, then reserves, residential school, railroad, which then created forest fires, logging, mining, etc., so forth. So for me, the fact that I see an acknowledgement from the city of Kenora on their website every time I go on it is quite a major shift. It's quite a big change for the thinking, the public thinking in that town. So for me, I would see this as a paradigm shift in the public discourse. But let's switch over to the table of contents from Silversides that I sent you. So he takes photographs of from Alberta and Saskatchewan and looks at them in 4 periods. So he looks at first contact, which was, he says, oh, hello? He says was a true documentary period. There was kind of equality. There were very few non-Indigenous in the area. Photographers were it was really kind of controlled by Indigenous people if they got their picture taken by professional. Then there was a period where the railways came in, there were a lot of settlers, and so he calls this a dying race. So there was an attempt to capture the pictures of famous leaders, representative Indians. You know, this is a good type of Indian. There was what he calls commercialization and tourism in photography. Then there was the period where they introduced the pass system, where there was extreme poverty, residential schools, and there were photographs of Indians doing white white laboring occupations. They liked that, wearing white clothes. And then the next period, he calls it inventing the legend, nostalgia for the noble savage, attractive images. So he says the images are beautiful, but they're without integrity of purpose. So he's talking about the, Banff Days, Calgary Stampede, things like that. So I think the land acknowledgement is evident of a real paradigm shift, but is it yet, or is it just, that's what I think, but it could be another example of inventing the legend, what he calls inventing the legend, a symbolic statement without integrity of purpose. And I guess the simple question is, words are easy, but how many land claims have been settled? So with his book, Silversides invites us to think about when photography of a marginalized people is invasive or not invasive. And the parallel would be, when is research into a marginalized community not invasive? So research is the business of universities. Susan Morton has a paper on the McGill website called Indigenous McGill, which goes through the history of Indigenous people and McGill University. And her conclusion is the ledger shows a great imbalance and that a great deal remains owing. So at U of T, where my old alma mater, they're trying to counter this with what they've created as an Indigenous research network. They have strategic networks in the university, and they've created an Indigenous one. And they're developing an Indigenous research ethics framework. Now, the associate vice president and vice provost talked about addressing the calls to action from Truth and Reconciliation, that they needed to deepen partnerships with Indigenous communities, learn from past mistakes with respect to cultural harm inflicted. And so the research network, she said, is a way to do this. So again, I feel this is a paradigm shift. So there's nothing like this when I was at U of T, but we don't yet know exactly what it means in practice, except maybe we have an example from the medical school in Northern Ontario, which is not specifically Indigenous at all, but it encourages Indigenous people to apply. The doctors that are trained in that medical school, which puts a great focus on sending them out to small communities in Northern Ontario, a great majority of them go into family medicine and stay in Northwestern Ontario and Northern Ontario. So I feel there's the same kind of thing will happen with the relationships with these changes that the universities are putting in. And so I just like to look at two critical issues here. There's what McIntosh and Wilder call epistemic injustice and epistemic violence, which arises from the dominance of some ways of knowing the world over others and make permissible some aspects of social life, representation, and state systems. So we're talking here of, quote, denigration, obliteration, and erasure, unquote, of non-European ways of knowing about being in the world, which goes with the promotion of dominant narratives, competition, hierarchy, and inequality. So they say that epistemic injustice is a consequence of dominant knowledge, which is reproduced through power relations, leading to what Fricker calls testimonial injustice, when the credibility of a speaker is denigrated because of prior prejudice against them, and hermeneutical injustice when the collective experience is denigrated. So in other words, the colonial experience. McIntosh and Wilder ask, how can academics de-link from this colonial knowledge-making practice towards more just ways of knowing the world? They say that one way is through acknowledging what has been happening more and more. And this is what's been happening. This acknowledging, I think, has been happening in Canada, and we're part of it. So acknowledging opens the possibility for multiple perspectives and, oops, got ahead of myself here, and contestations of dominant narratives. They also see powerful potential where, whoops, I think I'm in the wrong slide, sorry. Powerful potential where knowledge creation is done by loose collectives of knowers whose perspectives include those from outside the university and its training. So this is what this research network is about and what the U of T initiative is working to create. So collective creations, groups working together to actually work on knowledge creation. Now, there's a second issue I'd like to leave you with. The majority of researchers are non-Indigenous. Sheridan and McManamon address this issue as the conundrum of the damned if you do and damned if you don't. So they say, damnation is a liminal state that emerges from knowing that we cannot know. And this acknowledgement opens us up to the possibility of multiple perspectives. So same idea again, recognize, give it a name. So within damnation, every choice is understood as intricately shaped by accountability. So accountability to being in a white body that holds the past in every present moment will always hold risk and potential danger. So you can't escape your white body, and you can't escape the fact that it's white bodies that created the colonial system here. So they say it's not a question of how we are perceived, but how we effectively affect others. So here's one last quote. We live in our white bodies while attempting to counter white supremacy with our breath, words, and actions, and to be accountable to those attempts. Damnation is the embodied understanding that whitey is a part of me, and no matter how hard I try to exorcise whitey from my body and blood, whitey haunts. So we need to be accountable to the fact that most researchers are white, are non-Indigenous, and that that research has been a white endeavor in the universities that has been a major part of colonial structures and perpetuations. So, however, the way around it, I think, is through what's been happening, this acknowledging the creation of networks like this, and that are building towards all my relations as part of how Indigenous research is happening, or could happen, will be happening. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Jill. I don't know if Pierre, if you had anything you wanted to add at the end before we go on to our next.
No, I think it's it gives a nice framework for the perspective from the university side, but I guess we'll hear more about the Indigenous and non-Indigenous relationship building, which is now that you've set the stage, Jill, I think we can talk more about practically what needs to happen for best practices in relationship building.
Thank you.
Given also the constraints of the white system that was put in place for research. So
yeah, thank you for that. I thought since you opened up, I'd leave you to frame the end, and that segs very nicely into our next speakers today. We have Dr. Anne Macaulay and Alex McCumber, who are both at the Department of Family Medicine at McGill. Anne is Dr. Emeritus, but they have been with the Ganawagi School's Diabetes Prevention Program, KSDPP, since its inception in the 1990s, but they're going to tell you all about that, and I'll leave it to them. Welcome.
Good morning, thank you. I'm sure Anne's going to be saying, okay, Alex, you go first, even though we agreed that Anne was going to go first. So I'm going to introduce Anne and welcome everybody to our presentation about KSDPP. We're going to share our story. And so it's only proper that Anne does go first. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Anne?
Okay, Alex. So thank you, Alex, Yawa, and thank you to Dia for this invitation. And thank you, Jill, for those opening slides. Very thoughtful quotes. Gives us, I think, the real issues to think about as non-Indigenous peoples, as the whiteys, as you say in your last slide. Hoping, and anyway, let's talk about the Ganawagi School's Diabetes Prevention Program. So just, it's always a treat to co-present with Alex. I just want to let you all know that I came into research from a very different background. I am first and foremost a practicing family physician. And that's how I came to Ganawagi. Ganawagi was fed up of the white, non-Indigenous physicians that were being sent to them by the federal government. They had, before Medicare, they had worked hard and received independent funding to hire a physician. And I was fortunate enough to be the physician that they hired in the early 70s. So when I came to Ganawagi, I was very much there in a role to work with community leadership, work with the health leadership and the political leadership for the community to take control of health services themselves, to be able to decide what programs, to be able to hire their own health professionals, and to be able to take over control. It was in fact the first Indigenous community in the country to take control of health services. So, a decade and a half later, when we had documented high rates of type 2 diabetes in the community and high rates of the complications, and somebody suggested participatory research, it just made total sense to me to continue the partnership from a research perspective as opposed from a clinical perspective. When I say we, the other really important thing to know is that it was two of us as family physicians working in Ganawagi, and the other person was the late Dr. Louis T. Montour, who was from the community. He was one of the early physicians to graduate from McGill, chose to do family medicine, chose to come back and work in Ganawagi. So when we were concerned that there were very high rates of type 2 diabetes in the community, and nobody across the country had really been documenting type 2 diabetes in those days, I'm talking about the 80s, we thought it was important from a clinical point of view. And then once we had the results, high rates of diabetes, high rates of complications, we set off to share results with the community. So this was major knowledge translation before knowledge translation was invented as a phrase. And we made 14 different presentations around the community. And about 6 months later, some of the elders in the community went to speak with Dr. Montour. They knew him, you know, they knew him, they knew his family, and they said, you know, we'd like you to start a program to prevent this disease. We'd like you to start a program to focus on the young, to save the young from suffering the same burden of disease as us. You know, we've had our strokes, we've had our heart attacks, we've had our leg amputations, and we don't want it. So this, in fact, was a request from the community to start the Kahnawake Schools Diabetes Prevention Program. And we made a shift ourselves, because Dr. Montour and myself, we had actually planned to try and follow people with type 2 diabetes and track when they started with the complications, and we were hoping to use the results to feed back into the diabetes education program. But when community says, oh, we want you to stop this disease, I mean, how much more important is that? So, and that's what we did. And that's how we started off. So this was a request from the community. And then when we decided to two positions to run this program, Alex was one of the people who applied, and here we are 29 years later. So Alex, do you want to take over for a bit?
I thought that was a nice segue, Anne. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So back in 1990s, I was hanging out as the principal of the Kahnawake Survival School in high school, our high school on the reserve, putting out daily fires with students, you know, nothing like a bunch of radical Ganyakahaga teenagers all put together in those formative years, wanting sovereignty on all levels of life, and managing that. And here comes along Louis T. and Anne requesting an assembly with all the students, and they presented them with the results of the chart review that they found. And and at that time, I wasn't connected at all. I was in education, but what I knew about diabetes was from my mom, who was dealing with that and controlling that in her life. And the fact of them wanting to come to talk to the student body, one, recognized the role and responsibility that young adults have as the future of the community, but also that wisdom of you know, wanting to have contact with the youth and giving them that space to hear about concerns that affect them was just so, you know, just so future thinking by Louis T. and Anne at that time. And the students were impressed, but as students will take in information, you know, and go on to their things. But I know for sure that it did have, you know, at least that wake up of, you know, diabetes is something that's serious. And so I was headhunted. I didn't apply. I was headhunted by my boss, the director of education, who had already been brought into a partnership by Anne and Louis T. And they happened to be in-laws. And so Eddie Cross and a representative from the hospital were brought in and asked, you guys want to, you know, do you want to work together on this? And so I was, and my colleague Rhonda who was at the other end of the education scale. She was teaching kindergarten or grade 1 at the time, and we were both very well established in the community. We were both headhunted for career changes by our boss, who was also heading up this other project, and saw that we had skill sets that could really help this out. We were given this big CIHR proposal and said, here, go prevent diabetes. And so even back in those days, the first thought of it, like, we really didn't sit down and have this big in-depth education orientation of 2 community members charged with taking, so I was go prevent diabetes. And we looked at each other and said, okay, and what we did is, well, I guess we have to pull the community together and ask them how to go about doing this. And that set off a process, and so these little stories signify the processes that started and then got nurtured and evolved over the years working inside KSDPP, going from a 2-person, 3-year pilot project, which met with really great results of raising community awareness about the issue and small incremental changes starting to be recognized. But at the end of 2 years, the community saying, you can't stop this. You can't stop this. We need to be daily reminded about this. And you guys are doing that. You're raising that profile. And we did that with the elements of our project of creating partnerships, of going to the community and asking them, of saying what works in our community, what works best for us. And at the end of 3 years, we look back at that and realized that we had just naturally brought forth cultural practices and community practices into our work that just opened it up to the community, that made it a safe place, that made it something that was community owned. And the guide around this was an advisory board that was totally flat. And our organization has been totally flat, very little hierarchy. And outside of the community health board, very independent minded. And the community wanted that. The community participants are saying, no, we don't need the bureaucracy. You guys are doing work and we guide the work. And over the years, as we went through not only establishing our own relationships with one another as community and academy, and as we just started developing ideas based on what a one-day consultation with 75 community members at a golf club in the first month of the project gave us, the template of things to follow. And then from there, over the next to 2005-06, just bringing all of these things together on the table in a respectful space that was also negotiated. I mean, we had to learn how to do this because the academics came forward with CBPR, and we have our own ways of thinking around such a thing because it was very much mirrored to Indigenous practice and ways of consultation and everybody agreeing and arriving at consensus on decisions moving forward. But we came in from a community view. So we had 2 very different lenses of looking at CBPR. We had to negotiate relationships, power relationships as well, getting the voice in, trying to understand, not to trip over each other. We certainly had our conflicts in growing, and through it all, we always came around to resolve those things and keep it forward. And even as recently as 7 years ago, a consultant coming in and we were frustrated with a particular administrative development thing and said, what are your organizational values? And just with that reminder that we're coming from our teachings of Gained Goa, peace, power, a good mind, using our gifts in a good way, really helped us figure it out so fast, so that we're reminded that our own ways coming together and bringing forward in a respectful setting, and using not only the teachings of CBPR, but our own teachings of these very similar ways, the respectful engagement, that nobody's ways is better than another, is something that we're evolving to. And we'll still have those debates around those things, I think, because, as Indigenous knowledge emerges, people will still fall back into what they know of. Prove it. How do we know? How do we understand? How do we figure that out? How do we justify that and rationalize that? So it brings us into these conversations, and it's the relationship not only among the people working in the project over a long term, but new people from the community who come in and new people from the academy who come in and bring different ideas and perspectives that then go into that same mix and contribute to that conversation is then what build a strong relationship between the program and the community. And the interesting thing is that the big conflict around it, the existence, is with the health authority in the community, which is indigenous from the community, but comes from a Western perspective of top-down decision-making, in that we have the knowledge and experience, so we know better how to do these things.
Yeah.
And we've come up.
I want to add something.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So you've heard Alex talk about this big meeting at the golf club. And so that brought people together, thanks to Alex's connections and his understanding of the need to mobilize
And Rhonda.
And not just not become another silo in the community. Alex reached out to the education center and the Golden Age and the hospital and the community services, social services, and anyone else, who would listen, and brought all of these very different people together. And then out of this meeting came the development of the Community Advisory Board. And so that was about, 10 people from different walks of life, organizations in the community. And what we hoped was that they would bring their personal expertise to the table, but also their professional expertise from these different organizations, and then also take the message from KSDPP back to the organizations as well. So there was no expiry date for how long you could be on the Community Advisory Board, and some people have stayed on. My goodness. Some people like Amelia McGregor, who's now the elder, have been there from the beginning. And other people have come and gone, depending on their other commitments. And before Alex sort of takes over again, I just want to say that right at the beginning, the new Community Advisory Board and the research team set out to develop the code that what became the KSDPP Code of Research Ethics. So just a reminder that we were doing this before national guidelines. There were no national guidelines in the country for, researchers in partnerships with Indigenous communities. There was no CIHR that said that researchers should partner with communities, and there were no guidelines. So there had been early chat discussions in the background, across Canada with, allied Indigenous peoples and allied professionals, and also in the US. I've been doing some great work inside Indian Health Service, and again, the Indian Law Society in the US have been doing great work in ethics and development of ethics. And so we used all this knowledge again. Actually, it was some of the McGill researchers and myself that drafted the early outline, those skimpy, drafty early outline. And then we had a half-day meeting, full-day meeting. Do you remember, Alex? Half-day, full-day. Anyway, we divided into small groups and worked on different sections. And I will always remember, so the early draft said that the rights of the community and the rights of the researchers would be, blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And then the important thing is clearly working together. But I will always remember Trina Delomier, who was an early Community Advisory Board member, saying, no, it's the obligation of the community and it's the obligation of the researchers. And these are our ways of showing respect. These are our obligations to the project. It's not the rights, and it made so much sense. So after those meetings, it took about 8 months to develop this code of research ethics. But that was a very good step, because remember the time thinking this will never get finished, But it was a very good step because it gave everybody a chance to really talk, talk and make good joint decisions. And I think we all got to know each other a lot better in that process. And today we've just finished the second major revision of the research ethics. Okay, Alex, back to you.
And that was awesome. Thank you. And I'll just take a minute to wrap up at this point now, because Anne, that reminder about the Code of Research Ethics, the things that come out of this experience, this Code of Research Ethics has also been reviewed twice in these years by the community and the partner and the academy together. So it's the most amazing document that's now we're copywriting and will be distributed. And certainly we hope that it's going to spark that next round, a new level of conversations. But KSDPP also, since then, has been translating our experiences with other Indigenous communities, other First Nations communities, through a couple of community mobilization projects. Haudenosaunee and Ganyankahaga ways of knowing and understanding are coming onto the table as we say, okay, how do we look at these research opportunities, or how do we look at this research path, bringing something from our ways into the conversation. So it's starting to open that up with the young scholars who are coming through to it. Ganawagi and KSDPP successfully led 2 CIHR grants that were networks. One was the Indigenous Mentorship Network, and the other is this near. In partnership with Department of Family Medicine for sure, but First Steps been there. And I just recently have Edfon Brovin, who works with a homelessness project, just received a research chair, and his ally, his colleague on there, Ghislaine, is a patient partner, does not have any academic affiliation, and the chair was granted to both of them. This is the kind of thing that it leads to that's transformational. And then the last, big thing to just note about it is that personally too, that Amelia, who we talk about, is also going to be recognized by the Academy for her work and contributions to the conversations and the work we've done, with an honorary doctorate on May 30th. So just to round that all around, of some of these high points and successes would never have happened if there was not that wisdom at the very beginning to say, I'm coming into a community and I need to do things differently, establishing relationships to say, how does this impact the community? We have to let them know, and we have to get decision from the community, and then letting the community decide and guide where things go, and that there's an open table for that. All of those things wouldn't happen without any of those things in place. So that's our experience with relationships from Ganawagi's perspective. And on behalf of Anne and I, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Nyawagoa, for both of you, and for that. I really always love hearing about, the origins of KSDPP, and you both have been there from the beginning. It's really great to have both of you here today, so we're really thankful. And as I participate in the research team meetings, and I can tell you also from that perspective, I mean, Anne's there and Alex is there too, and there's, when people want to come and do a project, they're there at the research team meetings, volunteering in the committee. Things have to go through the research team. Everybody participates in reviewing what they're doing, and then it goes to the community advisory board. So that was just one other little piece I wanted to add in, because it continues. There's generations that keep continuing to come out of this program, right? So I'm gonna hand it over to Audrey, who's going to introduce our last person, also in the community perspective.
Oui. Oui, alors en fait, c'est ça, donc nos 2 derniers invités. Aujourd'hui, on reçoit Pierre, avec qui on a la chance de travailler. Moi, ça fait 1 an que je travaille avec lui, puis j'apprends beaucoup juste pour les valeurs qu'il incarne. Puis ce qui me donne envie de devenir, je pense, une une meilleure personne, tant en tant qu'humain, mais aussi en tant qu'assistante de recherche. Donc, c'est un privilège de te recevoir aujourd'hui avec Hélène Boivin. Hélène Boivin, qui était l'ancienne coordonnatrice aux relations gouvernementales à Pequawakami Nuash, Takukikan, je suis désolée si je l'ai mal dit, et maintenant aujourd'hui qui est consultante. Donc, ils vont parler de leur expérience ensemble, mais aussi distincte dans la construction de partenariats et en recherche. Donc, merci à tous les deux d'être avec nous aujourd'hui.
Merci. Pierre, tu voulais commencer?
Moi, j'allais te laisser la
OK.
place. Je pense que c'est plus logique.
OK. En fait, ce que j'aimerais vous partager aujourd'hui, c'est que au niveau de la recherche, puis je pense que ce soit Jill ou les deux autres présentateurs, vous l'avez aussi abordé, on parle de bâtir une relation. C'est pas dans l'idée que les gens débarquent puis ont leur vision, puis ont un échéancier à respecter et tout ça. C'est vraiment dans l'idée de bâtir une relation. Puis je dirais de la construire, cette relation-là aussi. Puis tantôt, je vais vous énoncer quelques principes et de l'entretenir. Alors, moi, je dirais que si on veut que les conditions soient gagnantes des deux côtés, on parle de bâtir, de construire et d'entretenir les relations. Et ça se fait sur du long terme. Les gens qui croient que tout ça, ça se fait dans 1 an, 2 ans, 3 ans, oubliez ça. Je pense que la perspective doit être sur du plus long terme. L'autre élément que j'aimerais amener, c'est de ne pas oublier que derrière les projets de recherche, il y a des humains. Autant au niveau des chercheurs, autant au niveau des communautés et des nations autochtones. Des humains avec leurs forces, leurs faiblesses. Et je pense que c'est un élément qu'il ne faut pas perdre de vue lorsqu'on fait de la recherche. La science, c'est super intéressant, c'est super, ça nous amène ailleurs, ça nous permet d'avancer. Mais si on veut que ces avancements-là puissent avoir les plus grandes répercussions, c'est que les humains qui sont derrière puissent en bénéficier puis puissent grandir aussi à travers ça. Puis, j'aimerais vous partager quelques principes au niveau de la recherche. Puis je pense qu'avec le projet qu'on a fait avec Pierre à l'époque, c'est des éléments qu'on a mis de l'avant. Puis c'est des éléments, je pense que les deux parties sur lesquels on était d'accord. Puis je trouve très intéressant que Jill l'ait mentionné. Le premier élément, selon moi, c'est la reconnaissance. Tout doit commencer par la reconnaissance. Puis moi, j'irais plus loin. J'irais dans une optique de reconnaissance que les gens, les communautés autochtones sont au même niveau que les chercheurs, de voir ça à ce niveau-là, de voir aussi à une reconnaissance par rapport au savoir traditionnel et tout ça. Puis je pense que les gens seront d'accord avec moi parce qu'on en parle beaucoup. Fait que c'est la reconnaissance, selon moi, c'est le premier élément. Le deuxième, c'est l'ouverture. Je vais vite parce que je veux laisser aussi l'occasion à Pierre de parler. Le respect, l'écoute, la flexibilité. Parce que, bon, Pierre, je pense que tu es un des meilleurs projets pour en parler, hein, parce que tu as vu passer beaucoup de monde. Le projet aussi s'est fait dans la pandémie. Puis je pense que dans les projets de recherche, la flexibilité par rapport au temps, par rapport aux ressources qui changent, par rapport aux dynamiques qui changent, mais ça, c'est un aspect qui est important. J'ajouterais aussi le dernier, il y en a sûrement d'autres, je pourrais en oublier, là, la collaboration, puis je pense que vous l'avez mentionné. Les autres présentateurs l'ont aussi mentionné. Et je terminerai en disant que les perspectives d'avenir, puis aussi de voir, je pense que dès le départ, là, quand on commence la recherche euh, au niveau autochtone et on veut que ça fonctionne, c'est de se dire que la recherche doit se faire par et pour les Autochtones. Fait que donc, dans les perspectives d'avenir, je résume là, parce que je pourrais en dire beaucoup là, sur la question, mais on a très, très peu de temps. Mais je dirais que c'est de penser dès le départ, quand on à ce principe-là de la recherche pour et par les Autochtones. Puis j'ai oublié un élément qui est important, qui est la réciprocité. Puis l'exemple que j'aimerais, moi j'aime ça être concrète quand je fais des présentations parce que je trouve que ça me, tu sais, c'est intéressant d'avoir des exemples concrets. Dans le cas du projet de Pierre, euh, cette relation-là s'est bâtie sur le fait que nous, on a essayé de voir à mettre d'autres projets qu'on avait déjà en place en complémentarité, notamment, tu te souviens, Pierre, celui sur les plantes médicinales, où est-ce que l'objectif qu'on avait dans ce projet-là, c'était de voir à ce que le savoir, les savoirs et connaissances traditionnelles soient valorisés, soient situés au même niveau que les connaissances scientifiques. Puis à l'inverse, le projet que de ton côté, ça nous permettait de soutenir ce que nous on dit depuis longtemps. Fait que ça, c'est des exemples là, de réciprocité où est-ce que l'un sert à l'autre. Voilà. C'est le principal de mon propos ici. Je m'arrêterai là pour l'instant et je vous remercie, avant de terminer, là, de m'avoir invité pour partager mon expérience et mes connaissances. Et je laisserai la parole à Pierre pour la suite.
Ben, merci beaucoup, Hélène. L'élément peut-être que je rajouterais à ta belle liste, c'est la confiance. Et ça se... En fait, je pense que c'est un sous-jacent à tout ce que tu as nommé là. Mais c'est ça, c'est vraiment de la chimie humaine que je dis, moi, qui fait qu'une relation va se bâtir ou non. Quand j'ai commencé avec les cris, je ne sais pas, j'ai eu une sorte d'intuition que je ne pouvais pas être un nom sur un bout de papier. Il fallait vraiment que je sois un visage, une personne, puis que je me présente et que j'établisse des relations humaines, comme tu as parlé. C'est vraiment, c'est la base même de les aînés. Il faut qu'ils te voient, il faut qu'ils te sentent, il faut qu'ils te size, si tu veux, en bon français. Voir qui tu es, c'est quoi tes valeurs. Euh, donc, j'ajouterais simplement cet aspect de confiance et réciproque. Alors, je trouve que c'est en bâtissant les relations, on vient à respecter et à faire confiance de part et d'autre. Évidemment, on fait des erreurs et je pense que l'aspect de l'humilité, que je répète souvent, que j'ai appris beaucoup grâce aux enseignements des aînés, euh, en tant que chercheur universitaire, on est entraîné plutôt à l'inverse, à se mettre de l'avant, se comparer, se compétitionner avec les autres en termes d'accomplissement et le cheminement académique est basé sur cet aspect-là de se mettre en valeur, alors que quand on rencontre et qu'on discute avec les porteurs de savoir autochtones, ben, on dirait que les plus sages sont les plus humbles, qui vont toujours dire, ah non, non, je ne suis pas un expert, je fais de mon mieux avec les connaissances que j'ai acquises et il y a une espèce de gifted, là, un don. Euh, et donc, je pense que ça, c'est beaucoup à apprendre. Ce qui a été intéressant dans le projet qu'on a fait avec Mastoyash, c'est vraiment l'apprentissage qu'on a fait en tant que chercheur, qui a fait en sorte qu'on a dédié un bon moment dans le projet à vraiment faire un tour de table de tout ce qui se faisait déjà dans la communauté, dans les différents secteurs. Alors, c'est un projet encore sur la prévention et la gestion du diabète à travers des saines habitudes de vie, mais ancrées dans la culture, donc l'alimentation traditionnelle, la médecine traditionnelle et les activités physiques culturelles. Donc, tous les secteurs ont été mobilisés et on a discuté ensemble. Et justement, on a fait essayer de faire une co-construction et un arrimage avec les choses qui étaient déjà faites dans la communauté et rajouter des éléments pour bonifier ça et rendre ça euh, le plus utile et le plus concret et le plus pérenne. Ça, c'est l'autre aspect qu'il faut amener, c'est que souvent les projets de recherche amènent des ressources financières et des ressources humaines, mais c'est ponctuel dans le temps. Alors ça fait monter l'intérêt et les attentes même. Et il faut vraiment qu'on réfléchisse à quel impact on va avoir et puis qu'est-ce qui peut rester et être utile à long terme et devenir des programmes, dans le fond, pour la communauté. Je vais m'arrêter là parce que je veux qu'on laisse le temps. En tout cas, c'est l'aspect humain, l'aspect de connexion, l'aspect d'humilité qui sont importants et de connexion humaine. Ouais, je vais m'arrêter là. Ah, je pense
On ne
que
t'entend pas, Audrey.
J'oublie tout le temps. Merci à tous les deux d'avoir partagé des exemples concrets, des valeurs, des façons de faire, puis de voir aussi comment votre relation de recherche a évolué, mais aussi comment vous incarnez vous-même ces aspects-là dans vos propres projets, puis dans la continuité aussi de vos nouveaux rôles peut-être à venir. On est maintenant à la période de questions, le Q&A. Donc, je vais nous remettre tous sans petite pine et j'inviterai les participants à poser des questions ou à y mettre des commentaires. C'est toujours apprécié. Si vous avez besoin d'une traduction à nos présentateurs, je vais le faire dans la meilleure de mes capacités. Mais j'invite, c'est ça,
Et peut-être noter, Audrey, que je pense que Jill doit repartir dans une dizaine de minutes. Donc, si vous avez des questions plus spécifiquement ou des interactions avec Jill, de les prioriser peut-être au départ. Là.
Oui, définitivement. Puis je ne sais pas si, I don't know, Alex, if you're confined in time, but if you need to leave also early, just let us know and we'll make sure that we mention it for the participants if they have questions for you.
And I'll add in too that Sherry, who does our evaluation, she has a feedback form, and it's always really helpful to get your feedback. We also share comments with your appreciations with the speakers. So I'll put that in the chat again.
I did it before you. Bon.
As you can see, there's already a conversation. Ah oui, vas-y. Ouais, allez-y. Go ahead. No. I was going to say there's already a conversation going on, a connection going on between UQAM and Manawan, the program they want to make, and KSDPP. It's kind of, there's been some sharing in the chat there.
Mm-hmm. Est-ce que peut-être les panélistes ont des questions ou des commentaires sur les autres? Maybe panelists have questions, comments for other presenters today.
Moi, j'inviterais les gens à partager qu'est-ce que ça leur fait, à quoi ça leur fait réfléchir, là, les choses qu'on a partagées. Qu'est-ce qui serait des points saillants ou à peut-être développer davantage?
Très, très bonne idée. Mathilde, oui, vas-y.
J'ai levé ma main en vrai. Est-ce que c'est correct si je pose ma question en français, même si c'est pour...
oui, puis je vais la traduire après au besoin.
OK. Je m'adressais plus à Madame Tory. En fait, j'ai été très intéressée par votre, justement, la perspective que vous ameniez, le rappel que l'université, finalement, c'est une institution qui cherche à avoir des revenus aussi, et puis que ça ne
Oui.
correspond pas nécessairement aux perspectives des partenaires des communautés autochtones. Mais donc, en fait, je serais curieuse de vous entendre un peu plus, peut-être des conseils, si vous en avez, pour les jeunes chercheurs qui commencent, qui sont aux prises un peu avec d'éventuelles conditions d'agrégation, donc les exigences des départements, mais dans toute la perspective des relations doivent se bâtir tranquillement, puis on ne veut pas faire de la recherche n'importe quoi juste pour avoir de l'argent.
Mais je peux dire que
Merci.
moi, je pense que la recherche est une activité de l'université. Donc, ça peut impliquer les gens dans la communauté, mais c'est le mover de la recherche, c'est les universités. Donc, il y a toujours une imbalance de pouvoir dans la relation sur la recherche. Donc, ça peut être amélioré par d'autres choses qui sont plus intéressantes pour la communauté. Ça peut être que la communauté eux-mêmes veut avoir les données de la recherche, mais c'est pas toujours ça. Et when push comes to shove, avec un grand projet de recherche, c'est les universités, c'est l'intérêt de l'université d'abord qui sera en première, selon dans mon avis. OK? Il y a des. Donc, il faut se méfier de la problématique de cette imbalance de pouvoir. Il faut travailler là-dessus très concrètement. Moi, j'avais une autre diapo que j'ai oublié de mettre. C'est le dernier diapo que j'ai dit, c'est tout éthique et valeur. Ça, c'est tout basé sur l'éthique et la valeur. Donc, c'est tout en des relations, mais c'est toujours une question éthique, toutes ces relations. Mais je pense que, OK, juste un exemple, l'Université de Toronto, si on regarde sur le site web, leur initiative pour la recherche autochtone, ils ont accès à des fonds de recherche dans l'université pour les projets qui sont nommés par les communautés, mais c'est un montant de 50 000. Donc, on ne fait pas grand-chose avec 50 000. Mais peut-être ils les utilisent pour combler avec d'autres sources de revenus. Mais c'est juste pour dire que le grand argent dans l'université, comme tu dis, c'est pas dans la recherche autochtone d'habitude. Il y en a, mais les comités d'éthique sont toujours basés sur le pensée dominant. Oui, il y avait toujours le problème de recherche qualitative et les comités d'éthique. Ça n'a rien à faire avec la recherche autochtone, mais ça veut dire qu'ils n'ont pas résolu la problématique dans la recherche qualitative. Donc, c'est un peu loin de dire, bon, ils vont tout d'un coup réussir à changer tout le mode de pensée pour la recherche autochtone. Mais je pense que c'est une bonne approche, c'est un bon pas. Je pense qu'il y a un changement d'idées, il y a un changement public. C'est public, ce changement. Oui.
Merci beaucoup.
Je pense que Anne et Pierre aimeraient contribuer. So I think Anne and Pierre would like to contribute. Go ahead, Anne. The mic is yours.
Yeah, I would just like to say that we have found our own code of research ethics to be invaluable. You know, we refer to it all the time. If I've ever had somebody, who's a researcher, university-based researcher, come to me and say, "Oh, I'd like to join your project." The first thing I do is I ask them to read the Code of Research Ethics and ask them if they support this and can they promise to work like this. Because our Code of Research Ethics states that absolutely everything has to be reviewed by community. The grant application, the posters going to the conferences, the articles, just everything gets reviewed by individual members of the community advisory board. So that's one thing. The other thing I found very useful at McGill was to go and work with the ethics board and train the ethics board. Because you need the hospital ethics board or the university ethics board on your side, and to explain to them what community-based participatory research is, what responsible, respectful research with community really is all about. Because that stops them, once they're on your side, they will challenge the researchers. So because you don't want, research that's slanted towards the researcher being supported by the ethics board. We had huge success. We had a wonderful director of the ethics board who turned around completely and became on our side. I'm not as involved as I was, so I'm not up to date with what's going on right now. But I highly recommend that. And it takes more than one visit. You have to keep going back and you have to challenge them. I can remember them sending back, their comments about some ethics, new research grant. They wanted my name on the consent form. And I said, it's not my name that's going to go on the consent form. Then on the consent form, it's going to be the Ganawagi Skills Diabetes Prevention Program. It's not my research. It's Ganawagi's research. And it's all of these small things. And you have to keep, picking away at it and get one thing changed at a time. I can remember another time when Community Advisory Board, it was something about parents giving permission for children, and I forget what the wording was. I totally forget what the details were, but community felt very strongly about it. And we went to the ethics board and said, you have to respect community decision making. It's not up to you to tell community, especially community parents, about their children.
I know Pierre is up next, but I think, Anne, you were referring to the study where they were asking for blood samples of children. That one, the study you were referring to. I think you froze, but yeah. And the community responded back and rejected it, yeah. Pierre.
Je veux intervenir sur plusieurs points pour le commentaire ou la question de Mathilde. C'est sûr que pour un chercheur qui veut s'en aller dans la recherche autochtone, en lien avec les communautés autochtones, on est en train de se battre pour qu'il y ait une meilleure reconnaissance de tout ce qui est justement de bâtir les relations donc, ça va devoir changer l'évaluation des professeurs et de comment ils sont évalués, mais ça va prendre du temps. Et ça, on est à pied d'œuvre, là, justement, pour, comme disait Jill, il y a un changement de paradigme. Et je fais le lien avec ce que Jill disait aussi, le rapport de force inégale. Je peux vous dire qu'avec l'entente de recherche qu'on a fait avec les CRI a vraiment brisé un plafond de verre parce qu'on a réussi à faire accepter, et il y avait des grandes universités impliquées, là, c'était l'Université de Montréal, McGill et Ottawa, et on a réussi à faire accepter le principe que la protection des savoirs traditionnels autochtones primait sur la liberté académique. Donc, les chercheurs ne pouvaient pas continuer à faire les travaux sans obtenir l'autorisation ou changer ce qui était planifié. J'ai un exemple concret à vous donner. On travaillait sur les plantes médicinales et le diabète. On étudiait ça dans nos pétris en laboratoire. On essayait de comprendre comment fonctionnaient les plantes. Et on a trouvé une plante qui avait des effets plus sur l'obésité. Alors, ceux qui connaissent le diabète savent que l'obésité et le diabète sont très étroitement connectés, mais ce n'était pas écrit mot pour mot dans la demande de subvention. Donc, on est retourné aux communautés, on leur a expliqué qu'est-ce qu'on avait trouvé, puis on leur a demandé la permission d'ajouter l'étude des aspects plus sur l'obésité et on a obtenu l'aval des communautés. On a pu faire ces travaux-là. Mais c'est juste pour vous donner un exemple concret que on a réussi quand même quelque chose de majeur, mais il faut aussi accepter que quand on fait ça, ça a des conséquences. Et justement, il y a certains étudiants que leur thèse a été gardée confidentielle pendant une longue période de temps jusqu'à ce que le processus d'évaluation par les communautés soit fait. Donc, il y a des conséquences pratiques, mais il y a des mécanismes dans les universités pour accommoder ça, puis ça évolue. J'abonde dans le sens de Jill qu'il y a vraiment un shift de paradigme. Même chose dans les organismes subventionnaires, comme les instituts de recherche en santé du Canada. Il y a eu vraiment des grandes avancées en termes de s'assurer qu'on a des bonnes personnes sur les comités de révision, qu'il y ait un processus itératif pour les chercheurs autochtones pour qu'ils puissent avoir du feedback, puis mieux se préparer, mieux bâtir leur demande de subvention. En tout cas, il y a beaucoup de choses qui évoluent et je pense que l'avenir est positif.
Et Pierre, je peux dire que ça a pris, je pense, 6 ans pour finir l'entente de recherche. On avait construit une intérim, une entente intérim. On avait tous les principes, on suivait les principes, mais ça a pris des années pour... Mais finalement, l'entente de recherche était pris comme un modèle international pour une période. Je ne sais pas maintenant qu'est-ce qui se passe, mais c'était pris par c'est quoi, Pierre?
World Intellectual Property Organization.
Oui. Et nous avons fait des présentations à Genève par invitation, mais quand même, Canada a voté contre toujours.
Ouais, effectivement.
Yeah, there's really been so many positive changes. So many positive changes, and the younger generation are now hopefully taking this as normal.
Yeah.
It's, and communities continue to get have more expertise, and Amir is helping that as well. So, it's a very different situation today. Positive, I think that maybe we need to hear if it's positive in the community.
But there's still and some challenges because there are more and more funding opportunities for, especially in Indigenous health research, and that pushes some researchers. I mean, we're always looking for opportunities, right? So these opportunities arise and they say, oh, I have this expertise. I want to offer this to the Indigenous communities. And so we're still receiving these, and then the Regroupement des Centres d'Amitié Autochtone also receives, these requests for help me connect with the community, because here I am, I have this expertise and I know there's I can help. And so it's still happening, unfortunately, and people don't know what they're getting into and what is the real challenges of doing proper building relationships, as Hélène was saying, takes years, and sometimes we don't have the leisure of these years to get a proposal in a few months.
Yeah, you're right, Pierre. Thank you for adding those comments. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
I could just point out that sometimes it's possible to do very useful projects for Indigenous health services, which are done in a completely non-intrusive way with administrative data or retrospective chart reviews. Sometimes these can be very good scientific projects, but they can also lead to immediate benefits in services for people. So these are kind of projects that need to be exploited as much as possible. I think they're very easy to do. They can lead to immediate benefit for services for clients, and they're quite non-intrusive as long as they're built with good partnership, with the Indigenous health services and things.
I'm wondering if Alex ou Hélène, you have something you'd like to share, si vous aviez quelque chose à partager. Pas toi, Hélène, c'est correct. I guess Alex neither.
I could just say something. Pierre a commenté qu'il y avait un changement et Anne a aussi fait la remarque. Mais dès qu'on a commencé de travailler avec l'Institut statistique du Québec pour un sondage et pour une autre étude, donc c'était comme on était pris dans les années 50 ou quelque chose. C'était incroyable. Eux, ils n'avaient pas eu d'expérience et c'était vraiment difficile. Ça a pris tellement de travail pour entrer dans leur monde un peu. C'était pas évident. Donc, mais c'était utile, donc on a fait une étude sur les enfants et l'école, l'état de santé. Et donc, c'était très utile pour la région, mais ça a pris quand même. On a fait une autre étude sur les données administratives, sur la santé des mères et des enfants, mais ça a pris énormément de travail pour trouver une façon de travailler avec l'ISQ à ce temps. Donc, c'est changé, mais il y a toujours des petits groupes cachés, je pense.
Alex, you opened your mic. Is it because you wanted to share something? Yeah, you can go.
Okay, thank you. So I guess just some concluding observations that with all of our projects and work that we do, it's so critical to get the information back to community in respectful ways that the community can understand the process, but also the results, and that and we have to create those spaces where community knows that they can come in and they can participate in the conversation, that can also be critical and know that they're not going to be attacked by Western scientists saying those ideas, that's backwards, that doesn't make sense, that's no good, you're a kid, you don't know what you're talking about, and things like that, because that's certainly prevailing attitudes, from, to all subjects and patients that we're trying to transform. The journey, is so long and arduous, and we make these small steps forward. Each small step is a huge victory going forward, and I'm about capitalizing that, and so that the second step is bigger than that first step, and that it's aggressive and deliberate and in your face for those that put opposition, because it's about finding, and one of those small steps is getting people on the other side of the table to sit down and listen. That if there's an engagement, a desire for an engagement moving forward, that it's a different set of rules. You're not coming in with a set of rules. You're coming in with an idea and it's the community that's making the rules about this. And when it goes to the academy and CIHR level, et cetera, as a community member, as a researcher, I'm expecting the academics to back me up. And I'm expecting them to back up the project, not just on the surface, but after conversation and agreement and working through things. Allies means allies. Allies means that we're going to both stand there together and take a bullet. Which then leads to the next, that what we're facing in breaking this is our systemic ways that have been put in place by, rich, long-bearded Victorian era lords of the universe that conquered continents and peoples with all the self-righteousness that they have to do that. And that shit carries on today in their descendants, and they're nested in the academy in high positions. They're established researchers, they're physicians that still carry that. And it continues to abuse people. And that's what has to change, so that when we go at that level, and so I'm thinking cultural safety and dealing with the Quebec government, I got no problem going to Lego and telling him he's a racist to his face, and to hammer it and Lafreniere till I drop dead. But I expect too then that all of us are doing the same thing and not letting up, because as soon as you take a break, they fill it with their violence and their bullshit rhetoric and lies, because that's what continues to be. And that's what I see coming from the community. Prove me wrong. So it's with that, and it's that intention of, this is how you change things. It's not only by bringing the evidence forward in the best way. It's not only by having and showing that there's an alliance of people working together, but also that the point we're making and the path that we're following is one coming to the table as equals. We're not asking you for shit, we're telling you shit. And you better pick up and start to listen about it. Because what's happening is that we're seeing the end of, civilization as the way it is. If you can't see that in the environment, you've got a problem. You've got a serious problem. And it requires a collective will and effort to ensure that what's coming down the future, that the people to experience it, especially the children and young ones, have all the tools that they're going to need, that on the other side of that they'll be bringing the healthy society forward and to fruition. So yeah, I'm off in the deep end into different places, but this is all the stuff that's part of the package that has to be stated and heard in moving forward to make change, because it's at that systemic level. And short of a baseball bat to the back, which I'm told I'm not allowed to even say anymore, we then have to find a way, how do we do that from a positive perspective, and get that lesson across, get that message across, that it's Legault's grandchildren and my grandchildren that are in the same boat. And that we want all those kids to be healthy and a future generation working together. So that's some observations that I'd like to share from what I heard today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this great conclusion and wrapping up everything. I appreciate it. We are at the end of this webinar.